A simple family barbecue was supposed to heal old wounds, but instead, it turned into my worst nightmare. The moment my 7-year-old son accidentally bumped into my brother's child, my mother didn't use her words. She grabbed a burning hot iron barbecue tong straight from the fire and pressed it hard into his hand. Hearing my child's skin sizzle and his piercing scream echo through the yard made me realize one cold, terrifying reality. My family had just drawn first blood, and what I was about to do next would ensure they paid for it until their very last breath. As I look back on that dark day, I need to know that I am finally safe sharing this. Could you tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your city right now? Hearing your answers reminds me that there is a world outside of my toxic family, and it gives me the courage to tell you the rest of the story. My name is Sarah, and for 32 years, I was the girl who believed that blood was thicker than water. I grew up in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood right here in Columbus, Ohio, believing that if you just loved your family hard enough, sacrificed enough of your own dreams, and swallowed your pride when they were cruel, things would eventually get better. I was a quiet, deeply patient girl, the kind of daughter who apologized even when she wasn't the one who broke the glass. I built my life around making sure everyone around me was comfortable, completely blind to the fact that my compliance was being used to build my own cage. Growing up, my father always told me that family was a team. But what he left out was that on this team, I was the only one expected to do all the heavy lifting while everyone else took the credit. I carried that innocence with me into adulthood, working long hours, building up my savings, and assuming that my hard work would one day earn me the one thing I craved more than anything, their respect. Instead, it made me the perfect target. I didn't realize that the people who were supposed to protect me were actually just waiting for me to lower my guard completely, transforming my deepest sense of loyalty into a weapon they would eventually use to try and destroy me, and the only thing I truly loved. Long before I had my own home, I lived in a house where my breath felt borrowed. By the time I turned 24, I was working 60 hours a week as a project coordinator in downtown Columbus, pouring every ounce of my energy into my career. My paycheck was substantial, but I barely saw a dime of it. Every single month, my entire salary went directly into our family's shared bank account. I paid 100% of the mortgage, the soaring utility bills, the grocery runs, and even the insurance premiums for our family vehicles. My father, Robert, had taken an early retirement due to a minor back injury, and my mother, Eleanor, claimed managing the house was too stressful for her to ever seek employment. So the financial weight of 4 adults fell entirely on my shoulders. I wouldn't have minded it so much if the household shared the burden of respect, but in our home, there was an untouchable entity, my older brother, Liam. Liam was the ultimate golden child. He was 26, unemployed, and spent his days sleeping in, playing video games, and racking up credit card debt that my mother would hand to me to pay off. According to Eleanor, Liam was a creative genius whose soul was too sensitive for a regular corporate job. Whenever I tried to gently suggest that Liam contribute even $100 to the utilities, Eleanor would slam her hand on the kitchen table, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you grudge your own brother a roof over his head, Sarah? You are a selfish, bitter girl. Money has ruined your heart." The dynamic shifted from draining to flat-out toxic when Liam met Chloe. Within 6 months of dating, Liam announced they were getting married, and without even asking me, Eleanor moved Chloe into our house. Chloe was incredibly arrogant, coming from a family that had lost their money but kept all of their high society pretenses. The moment she stepped through the door, she looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as a built-in maid who happened to fund her new lifestyle. Liam and Chloe took over the master bedroom upstairs, demanding that I move my things into the cramped, windowless basement room so they could have proper space for a young couple. My mother forced me to agree, claiming it was my duty as a sister. From that point on, my life became a living hell. I would come home after a grueling 12-hour shift at the office, starving and exhausted, only to find the kitchen sink overflowing with greasy dishes. Chloe would be sitting on the living room couch, filing her nails, looking up at me with a smirk. "Oh, Sarah, thank goodness you're home. We ordered Italian tonight, but we left the dirty pots from lunch on the counter. Make sure you use the hot water, okay? My hands get so dry. When Chloe got pregnant and gave birth to their son, Mason, the financial abuse escalated to a terrifying level. Suddenly, I wasn't just paying for groceries. I was paying for premium organic baby formula, designer strollers, and imported European wooden toys. Eleanor blindly supported their every whim, using my hard-earned money to shower Mason with luxury gifts while I wore shoes with worn-out soles. I remember one specific Friday night when I looked at our online banking app and noticed a $1,200 withdrawal from my personal savings sub-account. I confronted Liam in the hallway, my hands trembling with frustration. "Liam, where is my $1,200? That was my emergency medical fund." Chloe stepped out of their room, holding baby Mason, her eyes narrowing into a sharp, venomous glare. "It went toward Mason's luxury nursery glider, Sarah. Honestly, why are you making a scene over a piece of furniture for your nephew? It's not like you have a husband or a real life of your own to spend that money on. Stop being so pathetic and territorial." My mother walked up behind them, placing a comforting hand on Liam's shoulder while glaring at me. "Apologize to your brother's wife right now, Sarah. You should be honored that your money is going toward your family's future. If I hear you raising your voice in this house again, you can find somewhere else to live." I stood there in the dimly lit hallway, looking at the three of them, my mother, my brother, and his wife, forming a solid wall against me. They were living off my sweat, eating food bought with my labor, and sleeping under a roof paid for by my youth. Yet they looked at me with absolute disgust. That was the night the first crack appeared in my compliance. I realized they didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. To them, I was just a nameless machine that pumped out money. The turning point in my life arrived when I met Mark. He was a logistics manager at a company we partnered with at work, a grounded, deeply kind man who looked at me not for what I could provide, but for who I actually was. For the first time in my life, someone noticed the exhaustion in my eyes. When we started dating, Mark would take me out to quiet dinners around Columbus, and he was horrified when he realized I couldn't even spend $10 on myself without checking if my mother had drained our account for Liam's debts. Mark saw my worth, and slowly, he helped me see it too. He became my safe harbor, the one person who told me that my life mattered. When I finally gathered the courage to bring Mark over to meet my parents, I thought they would at least try to be polite. Instead, it was an ambush. I had spent 2 hours cooking a beautiful dinner, but the moment Mark sat down at the table, the air turned to ice. My mother, Eleanor, didn't even look him in the eye. Chloe sat next to Liam, whispering loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "He drives a Honda? Well, I guess some people have very low standards." My father, Robert, barely mumbled a greeting before turning his back. The real confrontation happened in the kitchen after dinner. My mother cornered me while I was wrapping up the leftovers. Her face was twisted with an ugly, panicked rage. "You are putting an end to this immediately, Sarah," she hissed, keeping her voice low but venomous. "That man is a nobody. He's going to take you away from this family. Who is going to pay the property taxes next month? Who is going to cover Mason's preschool tuition? You think you can just run off and leave us behind for some guy?" In that exact moment, the last piece of my naivety shattered into 1,000 pieces. She didn't ask if Mark made me happy. She didn't ask if he treated me well. All she cared about was the loss of her personal ATM. They didn't hate Mark because of his car or his job. They hated him because he was a threat to their free ride. "I am 31 years old, Mom," I whispered, my voice completely steady for the first time in my life. "And I am marrying him." The fallout was immediate and brutal. When I packed my bags 2 weeks later, my mother stood at the front door, blocking my way while Liam and Chloe watched from the stairs with smug smiles. "If you walk out that door, Sarah, you are dead to this family," Eleanor screamed, her face turning red. "You are a traitor. Don't you ever call us. Don't you ever come back, and don't expect a single dime from us when your little marriage fails." I didn't say a word. I walked past her, got into Mark's car, and never looked back. The very next morning, I went to the bank, closed the joint account, and opened a private line that required only my signature. The constant stream of free money completely stopped. 2 months later, Mark and I were married in a small, beautiful civil ceremony. None of my blood relatives attended, but for the first time in my life, I felt entirely safe. A year later, our beautiful son Toby was born. Looking into his innocent eyes, I swore a silent oath that I would never, ever let the toxic shadows of my past touch his life. We were building a real family, grounded in true love and mutual respect. For 7 long years, my life was filled with a peace I had never known growing up. Mark and I built a beautiful, stable life in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus. Toby grew into a bright, gentle 7-year-old boy who brought nothing but laughter into our home. I kept my promise. I blocked my mother's number, ignored the toxic family updates, and focused entirely on my own small, thriving world. Without my income subsidizing their lives, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my family's financial situation had completely crumbled. Liam's credit cards were maxed out, Chloe's expensive tastes had pushed them into severe debt, and they had been forced to take out a second mortgage on my parents' house just to keep up appearances. Then, out of nowhere, a heavy, embossed envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was an invitation to a grand family barbecue at my parents' house, celebrating my father's 71st birthday. Along with the card was a handwritten note from my mother, Eleanor. The handwriting was shaky, filled with words about how life was too short, how she missed her daughter, and how she desperately wanted to meet her grandson Toby before it was too late. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at that note. Mark was incredibly skeptical. "Sarah, people don't just change overnight. Protect your peace," he warned me gently. But a small, naive part of my heart, the little girl who still craved a mother's love, wanted to believe she was being sincere. However, Mark had to fly out to Chicago for a mandatory 3-day business conference that exact weekend. I told him I would be fine, promising to leave the party the second I felt even slightly uncomfortable. I swallowed my rising anxiety, strapped Toby into his car seat, and drove over to my parents' neighborhood on a humid Saturday afternoon. The moment I pulled up to the curb, I realized my mistake. The entire front yard was packed with expensive cars belonging to old family friends, wealthy neighbors, and prominent people from Liam's professional circle. My mother hadn't invited me because she missed me. She had invited me because the local gossip columns and neighbors were starting to ask why her only daughter hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. She needed to parade me and Toby in front of everyone to prove to the world that they were still a perfect, loving, upper-class family. I took a deep breath, gripped Toby's small, warm hand, and walked into the backyard, completely unaware that I was stepping directly into a trap fueled by 7 years of unspoken venomous resentment. The air in the backyard was thick with the heavy scent of burning charcoal and the loud, forced laughter of people trying too hard to look wealthy. The moment I walked through the wooden gate, Chloe looked me up and down with a cold, sweeping glance, whispering something into Liam's ear before turning away. My mother, Eleanor, immediately rushed over, her face stretched into a theatrical, performative smile. She didn't look at my eyes. She looked at the people watching us. She loudly proclaimed how wonderful it was to have her beautiful daughter and grandson home, making sure the neighbors heard every single word. I felt sick to my stomach, but for Toby's sake, I kept a polite smile plastered on my face and steered him toward the lawn where the children were playing. Liam's son, Mason, was now 8 years old. Because he had been raised by Liam and Chloe, he was incredibly spoiled and aggressive, knocking over lawn games and demanding that every toy belonged to him. Toby, who was naturally gentle, kept his distance, playing quietly with a small toy truck near the edge of the patio. I kept a watchful eye on him while standing near the kitchen window, trying to ignore the condescending remarks Chloe was making about my modest outfit to a group of local women. Then, everything happened in a blur of terrifying motion. Mason came sprinting around the corner of the brick patio, tracking a flying foam ball without looking where he was going. Toby turned around just as Mason barreled into him at full speed. The impact sent both boys crashing down onto the concrete tiles. Mason landed on his elbow, scraped it slightly on the rough stone, and immediately let out a piercing, dramatic shriek, crying at the top of his lungs. Toby, though bruised and shaken, sat up quietly, rubbing his knee. The moment Mason's cry pierced the air, Eleanor dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the flagstone as she and Chloe flew across the yard like vultures. Chloe scooped Mason into her arms, glaring at Toby as if he were a criminal. "Look what your brat did to my son!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure malice. "He did it on purpose. He's just as bitter and resentful as you are, Sarah." Before I could even cross the lawn to defend my son, my mother, Eleanor, completely lost her mind. The built-up rage of 7 years, the loss of my money, the humiliation of my departure, the crumbling of her pristine family image, all of it exploded into a single moment of unhinged fury. She looked down at Mason crying, then looked at Toby, who was still trying to stand up near the massive red-hot commercial barbecue grill. "You ungrateful little monster!" Eleanor snarled, her face turning an ugly, bruised shade of purple. With a terrifying speed, she reached out, grabbed the long, heavy iron tongs sitting directly inside the blazing charcoal grill, and lunged forward. Before anyone could comprehend what she was doing, she slammed the red-hot metal directly onto the back of Toby's bare left hand. A sound came out of my son that will haunt my dreams until the day I die. It was a high-pitched, agonizing shriek of pure terror and pain. The smell of burning flesh instantly cut through the heavy smoke of the barbecue. "Toby!" I screamed, a primal, maternal instinct taking over my entire body. I sprinted across the grass, launching myself forward. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I slammed my weight into Eleanor, violently shoving her backward away from my child. She stumbled, crashing into a row of patio chairs, dropping the searing metal tongs onto the grass. I fell to my knees, scooping Toby into my lap. He was shaking violently, crying so hard he could barely breathe, holding his left hand toward his chest. The back of his delicate skin was already blistering, turning a horrific, raw white and angry crimson. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but a cold, deadly clarity washed over me. I didn't yell at my mother. I didn't look at Chloe, who was suddenly staring at the scene with wide, panicked eyes. I pulled my phone from my pocket with a steady hand, pressed 3 digits, and held it to my ear. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice cracked through the line. I need police and paramedics immediately at 1422 Elmwood Drive, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, staring dead into my mother's terrified face as she struggled to stand up from the chairs. A child has been severely burned. The attacker is still on the premises. Within 6 minutes, the quiet, elite neighborhood of Columbus was shattered by the deafening wail of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the expensive windows of my parents' house. 2 police cruisers and an ambulance tore up the driveway, their tires screeching on the asphalt. The paramedic team rushed into the backyard with a trauma kit, immediately taking Toby from my arms to treat the severe second-degree burn. As they loaded my sobbing boy into the back of the ambulance, the police officers surrounded Eleanor. In front of the mayor's wife, in front of the wealthy neighbors, and in front of every single person she had spent her life trying to impress, Eleanor's hands were pulled behind her back, and a heavy pair of steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. The sterile, blinding white lights of the Columbus emergency room did nothing to calm the roaring fire in my chest. I sat by Toby's hospital bed, holding his uninjured right hand while the medical team carefully wrapped his blistered left hand in thick, soothing layers of medicated gauze. The doctor confirmed it was a severe second-degree burn, inches away from causing permanent nerve damage. Toby had finally cried himself to sleep, his tiny shoulders shifting with exhausted, shallow breaths. I looked down at his bandaged hand, and any remaining shred of familial love inside me turned to absolute stone. I pulled out my phone and dialed our family attorney, a fierce, no-nonsense lawyer who had helped Mark and me protect our assets years ago. "File everything," I told him, my voice a cold whisper in the quiet hospital room. "Child abuse, second-degree felonious assault, endangerment. I want the maximum charges pressed. Do not hold back." An hour later, the heavy wooden doors of the waiting room burst open. My father, Robert, and my brother Liam rushed in. They didn't look like the proud, arrogant men who had spent years looking down on me. Their clothes were disheveled, their faces pale, and their eyes frantic. Sarah, thank God, Liam panted, stepping toward me with his hands raised in a pleading gesture. You have to call the police station right now. They're holding Mom in a cell downtown. They're talking about actual prison time, Sarah. It was just an accident, a family dispute that got out of hand. Think about the family name. My father stepped forward, his voice cracking with a desperate authority he no longer possessed. Sarah, please. The local news reporters are already outside the police precinct. Liam's firm is calling him about the rumors. If this goes to a public trial, our reputation in this city is entirely ruined. We won't be able to show our faces anywhere. Please, for the sake of your own mother, drop the charges. I stood up from my chair, stepping away from Toby's bed so my voice wouldn't wake him. I looked at my father and my brother, the two men who had watched me drown in bills for years, the two men who had stood by while Chloe treated me like a servant, the two men who hadn't even asked the doctor if Toby was going to be okay. All they cared about was their precious, hollow reputation. An accident? I said, my voice cutting through the clinical air like a razor blade. She took red-hot iron tongs and branded my 7-year-old child like livestock because your spoiled brat tripped over his own feet. You didn't care about family when you drained my bank accounts. You didn't care about family when you threw me out for wanting a life of my own. And you certainly didn't care about Toby when he was screaming in agony on your patio. Sarah, please, Liam begged, a tear finally slipping down his face as the reality of his crumbling social standing set in. Get out, I commanded, pointing directly at the exit. If either of you or Chloe ever comes near my son, my husband, or my home again, I will get a restraining order so tight you won't even be able to breathe in the same zip code. My mother is going to prison, and I am going to make sure of it. I kept my word. The official forensic medical reports from Columbus Children's Hospital, detailed photographs of Toby's agonizing injury, and the written statements from 3 prominent neighbors who witnessed the attack became an airtight trap for Eleanor. During the final sentencing at the Franklin County Court, the courtroom was dead silent. My mother sat at the defense table, her head bowed, stripped of all her high society pride. The judge looked down from his bench with absolute disgust, banging his gavel. This court finds the defendant guilty of felony child abuse and second-degree felonious assault. For branding a defenseless 7-year-old child with a weapon of fire, Eleanor is hereby sentenced to exactly 10 years in the Ohio State Reformatory, with 0 eligibility for early parole, along with a $50,000 fine. The sound of the gavel echoing through the room felt like the final slam of a cage door. Eleanor gasped, breaking into deep, desperate tears as the bailiffs immediately led her away in chains. The karma didn't stop at the prison gates. The local Columbus news networks ran the story on the front page, featuring Eleanor's mugshot alongside a detailed description of the toxic family dynamic. The public backlash was immediate and merciless. The very high society friends and wealthy neighbors they had spent decades trying to impress completely ostracized them. Every single guest who attended that fateful barbecue cut ties with the family, deleting them from charity boards and social circles. Liam's corporate firm, desperate to distance itself from a viral child abuse scandal, quietly forced him to resign within a week of the sentencing. Chloe, unable to face the whispers and pointed fingers at the grocery store and country club, stopped leaving their house entirely, their fake empire collapsing into a pile of debts and public shame. 3 months later, I sat on the back porch of my own home, watching the sunset paint the Ohio sky in brilliant shades of gold and purple. Mark sat beside me, his arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders, while Toby chased our golden retriever across the green grass of the lawn. His left hand was fully healed, the skin smooth and free of pain, his laughter filling the warm evening air. I took a deep, clear breath, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over my soul. The zipping sirens and the flashing blue lights of that horrific afternoon had finally faded into the past. My toxic bloodline had tried to burn me, but in the end, the ashes belonged entirely to them. I was finally free, surrounded by the only family that ever truly mattered. Sitting here today, looking at my husband and my happy, healthy son, I realize that some people only understand the value of family when they can no longer exploit it. It took the most heartbreaking moment of my life to finally break free from that toxic cycle, But justice prevailed, and karma found its way to their door. I survived my past, and I protected my future. Now, I want to ask you, what did you learn from my journey? Do you think I did the right thing by putting my own mother behind bars? Let me know in the comments below. And if you learned something valuable from my story, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join us daily.